Let's go back to last Sunday when President Trump announced Project Freedom. Up until then, it looked like we did basically have a ceasefire between the United States on one side and the Iranians on the other side. We certainly still had these two blockades on, the American blockade on the Strait of Hormuz and the Iranian blockade of the Strait of Hormuz. But there was no shooting for the time being. And then on Sunday, President Trump said that we were going to guide those tankers and other cargo ships that were in the Persian Gulf out of the Gulf so that they could deliver their goods around the world. And he didn't say that we were going to use military force or we're going to open the strait with military force, but we were going to, quote unquote, guide those ships out. Then on Monday, we attempted to do that, and we ended up in a shooting match. There were Iranian boats and American destroyers and American aircraft that engaged in firefights in the Strait of Hormuz. And very importantly, the Iranians also attacked the United Arab Emirates. They attacked this port, a very important port, Fujairah, where the UAE has been exporting its oil from, because that port, Fujairah, is outside of the Persian Gulf. But the Iranians attacked it. And this is what happened on Monday. Then on Tuesday, President Trump said, Epic Fury is taking a pause. It's over with. So we had no more shooting on Tuesday or on Wednesday. And then yesterday, which was Thursday, it started up again. And it appears that 3 American destroyers tried to go through the strait. I believe they were leaving the Persian Gulf and going into the Gulf of Oman. And the Iranians fired on them, and the United States retaliated by hitting 3 targets inside of Iran. It was not a major escalation by any means, but nevertheless, it was an escalation for sure. So that was yesterday. And basically what we're saying here is that Thursday looked like Monday. And then today, Friday, we're back at it again. It appears that the United States has hit 2 empty Iranian tankers that were trying to go through the blockade. And furthermore, it appears that the Iranians are again striking the United Arab Emirates. So the fighting has started again today, Friday, but at a very low level. So I think what you see, Rachel, over the course of this week, going from Monday to today, Friday, is that the ceasefire really doesn't exist in the literal sense of that term. I mean, if you cease fire, then you cease firing at each other. And this is not a ceasefire. But at the same time, it's very low level. These are very low level engagements. And it's not a case of the United States or Iran marching up the escalation ladder in a really meaningful way. And I think that what most people fear is that that's what's going to eventually happen. But it certainly has not happened yet.
Yeah, and it has been so interesting to watch, exactly as you're describing it there. Is it's like every day we're getting up going, okay, what has happened now? And it almost feels like we're on the edge of a cliff and we're just waiting for one of the sides to launch a massive attack and then the other side to retaliate, and that escalation ladder to speed up very, very quickly compared to what we've seen. And it has been interesting to watch as the Trump administration seems to really have this focus on this naval blockade of Iranian ports, as if that in and of itself is not an act of war, as if it's much more of a humanitarian mission here. And I thought it was interesting. You have the Washington Post coming out and reporting this week that a confidential CIA analysis was delivered to administration policymakers this week, which concludes that Iran can survive the U.S. naval blockade for at least 3 to 4 months before facing more severe economic hardship. So when it we look at this current situation, I know we've talked in the past about how the global economy is already starting to scream. The idea of this going on for 4 more months puts us in an even more dire situation. How do you view this current standoff and what it could mean for the economy if the U.S. continues to focus on this blockade?
A couple points. One is, just to go to the Washington Post story about the CIA report, basically, that report says that the Iranian economy will be wrecked in 3 to 4 months, or it'll take 3 to 4 months to really wreck the Iranian economy. But that, very importantly, does not mean that Iran will surrender. And I believe that Iran will not surrender, that you can inflict much more punishment beyond those 3 or 4 months, and the Iranians will not surrender. I think the historical record is quite clear on this issue, that societies in wartime can absorb enormous amounts of punishment, number one. And number two, the Iranians are facing an existential threat. They're up against 2 genocidal states, the United States and Israel, and they are committed to destroying Iran, to wrecking it, to making Iran look like Syria. And given Iran's emphasis on survival, they're not going to surrender. So this is going to go on beyond 3 to 4 months. Second point I would make is that the proponents of the blockade are fully aware that it will take a long time to work, even from their perspective. In other words, they don't think that Iran is going to throw up its hands tomorrow. They understand that it's going to take, even in their story, a long time. And that has led them to put an emphasis on restarting the bombing campaign against Iran. And in other words, the belief is that the blockade, in conjunction with a bombing campaign, a serious bombing campaign, will be a formidable 1-2 punch that will finish off the Iranians and get them to surrender. So I think the reason that you and I both wake up every day wondering whether or not we're going to go up the escalation ladder today or not is because there is a lot of pressure on the administration from the proponents of this war to go up the escalation ladder and to start bombing Iran again, because they all understand deep down that the blockade alone is not going to do the trick, certainly in a short period of time. And as you said, the more time goes on, the more the economy begins to move in and crush President Trump and put him in a position where he has no choice but to figure out how to get out of this conflict. So the crushing effects of a continuing war do create an incentive for him to try to escalate. But the problem that he faces is that escalation is not a war-winning strategy. The fact is that we bombed once before and it didn't work. Now, the other side will argue, yes, but the last time we bombed, we did not have simultaneously a blockade on Iran. Now we have the 1-2 punch, so let's give it a try. And that logic may be enough to push Trump over the line and get him to go up the escalation ladder. But as I have long argued, that's not going to work. The fact is, as I said before, you can inflict massive punishment on the Iranians, and given their strategic situation, they're not going to quit.
Yeah, exactly. As you said, as I'm watching the Trump administration, it's almost more concerning to me, the people that are in his ear that are telling him, oh, yeah, we can do it now. We've got this blockade. We've got all these different military options. But exactly as you're describing it there, look, Iran is holding on to control of the Strait of Hormuz with everything they have. That is not going to change. I mean, the IRGC announced this week that they will be expanding their control of the strait, going right up to the UAE's port, which you were explaining earlier, they're using to bypass this initial blockade by Iran. So when it comes to control of the Strait of Hormuz and the impact that Iran is able to have on the global economy, on all of these different elements that we all rely on, we obviously have not started feeling anywhere near the pain we are going to feel just yet. How important is this vital waterway? And do you expect to see the conflict continue to focus on the Strait of Hormuz as the US and Iran continue to face off?
You want to remember that to get a deal here, so that we can end up putting this conflict behind us and avoiding the international economy going off a cliff, there are just all sorts of issues that have to be worked out. I mean, one of the reasons I'm very pessimistic that you're going to get some sort of meaningful settlement that will allow the international economy not to go off a cliff is because there are just so many different issues that have to be settled before you could end the conflict. Now, a lot of focus on the part of the Trump administration is on the nuclear issue. And the nuclear issue by itself is a very complicated issue. There's the whole question of what kind of nuclear enrichment capability the Iranians are going to be allowed to have. There's the whole question of what to do with those 11 tons of enriched uranium that the Iranians have. There's the question that you were raising of the Strait of Hormuz. What's the future of the Strait of Hormuz? Is the United States going to allow Iran to control the Strait of Hormuz and keep a toll booth in that strait for the foreseeable future? What's the future of American military bases in the region? What's the future of reparations? What's the future of sanctions? What's the future of Iran's relationship with Hezbollah, Hamas, and the Houthis? These are all big issues. What's the future of the Iranian missile program? And so forth and so on. So we not only have to work out the nuclear issue and the question of who controls the strait, all these issues have to be addressed. And it's hard for me to imagine the United States and Iran reaching a deal on these different issues anytime soon. And then throw in the Israelis. Even if the United States and the Iranians are moving toward a deal, the Israelis, who want to continue the war and want to destroy Iran very much, will go to great lengths to undermine the negotiations between the United States and Iran. And then when it comes to negotiations, there are two big problems there. One is the trust issue. Do you think the Iranians trust the United States at this point in time? The last time the two sides were negotiating, we all of a sudden launched a war against Iran in the middle of the negotiations. Can the Iranians trust the United States? And then moreover, do you think the Trump administration is really capable of executing a negotiation that leads to a meaningful settlement? This is the gang that can't shoot straight. They couldn't settle the war in Ukraine, right? They can't end the genocide in Gaza. This is not a highly competent administration that's filled with top-rate diplomats. Instead, they have people like Jared Kushner and Steve Witkoff in charge. So when you put all these things together, it's just hard to see how you get any meaningful settlement. And if you don't get a meaningful settlement, the economic consequences of this in the months ahead are just going to increase greatly. Almost everybody agrees that the longer this war goes on, the worse the economic consequences for countries all around the world. And President Trump seems to understand that. He seems very anxious to figure out some way to get out of this pickle that he's in. But as I said, I don't see how he does that. There are just so many factors that weigh against a meaningful agreement. I hope I'm wrong, but I don't think I am.